Pencoed Trust runs a relatively small sheep, beef and cropping operation that's kept flexible to take advantage of shifting market opportunities. With limited land area, the focus is on maximising production. The farm became involved in a district-wide study funded by the Rangitikei District Council and MPI called the Strategic Water Assessment Project and run by the Catalyst Group.
Pencoed was one of the properties that did a trial assessment to look at smart water use. This was one of the kind of foundation properties. We ran that project through 2015. With this particular property, we were looking at what would happen if we brought irrigation to it and what would happen if we did a dairy conversion. What did the numbers look like and what were the impacts? What makes these properties and this trial pretty special is that this is the first region in the country operating under a nutrient cap. So it's got a regulatory framework where each property has effectively got a nutrient loss on a per kilo of nutrient loss per hectare per annum that it has to meet. And so we were doing it on the basis that whatever we came through with had to meet that number. What we did here for every one of the catchments with the regional council and a lot of other stakeholders was effectively work out in every river and every stream what the load needed to be to meet the values of the community. And then effectively you assign the right to put that nutrient into those water bodies to industry, to communities, to farming. And it's really challenging in some areas. The Upper Manawatu, the amount of nutrients grossly exceeds what should be going in there, so you're clawing back. But in the Rangitikei where we're doing this project, it's really special because very high quality water body. The Rangitikei is it's a river of national importance. It's got a water conservation order on it. It's very highly valued by the community. And it's in a good state. So the decisions we're making today are easier decisions to make, but they have an economic consequence for every landowner. We were looking at whether a dairy was a solution from an economic perspective. First thing is, of course, the landowner needs to want to go dairying. And in this case, that wasn't a particular driver for Brendan and Rachel, but they were interested in what those numbers could do for them. It turned out that if they went dairying, it's about a $4 million capital injection. There might be a moderate return on investment on a per annum basis, and it shows how fast the market's moving. But these few months ago when that trial was done, it would have stacked up for a capital gain over the long term. So had they been in the game of developing land to on-sell, the assessment showed that with the $4 million injection, within a decade, they could have taken a mil or $1.5 million out of the project. But they're in their second generation on this land now, and there's a third in the wings, and that wasn't in their plans. So it was about cash flow and net return on a per hectare basis, on a per annum basis, that ended up being the driver. So we looked at what could irrigation do for cropping. The best thing about this property and the biggest dilemma, it's a very high performing property. So it's in the top 5 to 10% of properties. And so it means it's really hard to get those gains out. And what we demonstrated that irrigation just wasn't the answer. Fractional return on investment, but it's not worth that investment really. It's a risky proposition. Brendan's got a system here where he has eked the most out of this land in what we think is a really sustainable way. We went through the exercise of looking at the land use capability, and I guess what we've always said is that that's the foundation for all critical decision making on land.
We're about 210 effective hectares. It's a mixed arable farm. We grow about 100 hectares of maize for grain. The remaining 110 hectares, we normally do 25 to 30 hectares of cereal, which is either wheat or barley or a bit of both. And then the remainder's left in grass, and we just finish lambs and cattle. Greg Carlyon from the Catalyst Group asked us to get involved in the strategic water assessment that they were doing. Our property being typical of a lot of the properties around here, that it was probably a good opportunity to see what other opportunities would fall out, not just for us, but for the locals as far as irrigation went. We probably always knew in the back of our mind that adding water to the likes of a maize crop would add a certain amount of yield, but whether it was actually worth chasing that last bit of yield for the cost of that, of having irrigation. I guess it's easy for everyone to be interested in irrigation in a dry season, because you start thinking, if we could add water now, But you also got to take into account those seasons where you'll park it in the shed and won't need it. The assessment gave us the chance to have the numbers crunched for you and then make an informed decision. We were able to work out that, look, if you were going to get involved in an irrigation project here, then how was that going to affect it and how was that going to change the limits? We know that we're going to be shortly under the one plan and going to have to start looking at those limits. I guess you do consider it, and the cropping model is reasonably easy because you're soil testing before you plant and you can work out what nutrients for what yield, so it's a reasonably easy scenario.
A big part of this study was what drives people to irrigation, and what we found was that most of the decisions to go to irrigation are heart decisions, not head decisions. Well, I think the take-home message is that before you go into irrigation, you really do the numbers. And the other thing that people are making the investment decision to irrigation for, it's insurance. And so they're going, I'll put it in for insurance, but it's not very smart insurance either. What we've found in some of the other trial properties is a 60% return on investment. So there's places where irrigation really does pay. The challenge with it is that where irrigation pays, there's generally quite significant environmental consequences, and you need to balance those up and need to be prepared to offset the costs of those impacts.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.